Alright guys, so welcome to episode 4 in the introduction to human resource management. In this video we are going to be talking about recruitment and selection. In the first video we talked about the evolution of human resource management through the years. In the second video we talked about strategic human resource management. In the last video, video 3, we talked about human resource planning. In this video we're going to take into consideration that the planning has been done and it's now about getting the right persons into the organization. So we're going to talk about recruitment and selection in this video. Now the objectives of this video, we want to be able to define the term recruitment and selection. We want to discuss approaches to and benefits of internal and external recruitment, and we want to be able to have some discussions on internal recruitment as well as elaborate on external recruitment in terms of the selection process. And of course, everything that we're doing it against the perspective of we have the opportunity to support our organization, the organization for which we work, or another organization in improving their HR practices. So we're going to have the added responsibility of critiquing HR practices within the local context. So as we mentioned, we would have undergone the HR planning, we would have set the organizational objectives and strategies, assessed the internal workforce against the organizational objectives and strategies, scan the external environment in terms of the changes taking place with reference to the labor supply, create a forecast of the needs for the organization and the time frame, identify the need for people, determine the people available, and formulate the HR strategies and plans. These are things that would have taken place in the HR planning process. Now we want to look at recruitment, and we're going to use the simplest definition. Recruitment and selection is the process of getting human resources into the organization, or in some cases into departments, because if we're talking about internal recruitment, we're not necessarily getting persons into the organization, but we're getting them into departments. And as we mentioned, there are prescriptive strategies, and prescriptive strategies essentially are the end result of the HR planning. According to the research, a prescriptive strategy is one where the objective has been identified in advance and the main elements have been developed before strategy commences. As a prescriptive view, strategic management could be described as the identification of the purpose of the organization and the plans and actions to achieve the purpose. So it's before the strategy is implemented, before the strategy commences, and it's as a result of the HR planning. We would also take into consideration exceptions to the rules. So after the HR planning process, we would come up with certain rules, certain ways we're going to be behaving as an organization, certain prescriptions to be filled. But there may be exceptions to the rules. We're going to make certain kinds of determinations, but we must give that kind of leeway or that flexibility for exceptions to the rules. For example, in the case of multiple compensation approaches. So in the HR planning, we may come up with an HR strategy that says we're going to use internal consistency, which means that we're going to make sure everybody who is in the organization doing the same job would be getting the same compensation or would be compensated in the same way. However, it is possible that we may come across an individual that could add significantly more value to what's going on in the organization, and in a case like that, we may be prepared to pay for knowledge. So we go away from the internal consistency and we might go with pay for knowledge because of what that person is bringing to the table. So there is likely to be exceptions to the rules, notwithstanding the HR planning process would have produced a certain set of prescriptions. And then, of course, there are emergent strategies. And emergent strategies, we're talking about those things that would emerge or those needs and challenges that would emerge as a result of reports that would be done within the organizations, whether weekly reports, monthly reports, quarterly, semi-annual or annual reports. These things may give way to external strategies or changes in government policies, as we would have talked about. These could give way to emergent strategy. An emergent strategy is the view that strategy emerges over time as the intentions or the prescriptions collide with and accommodate the change in reality. So these prescriptions are actually colliding with a change in reality, and to make accommodations, emergent strategies would need to be formulated. In terms of recruitment and selection, we're now looking at the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other attributes of the respective jobs that exist within the organization. Each job is going to have a requirement for knowledge, skills, and abilities, and would place demands on the job holder in terms of other attributes. In order to come up with these KSAOs, as we would call them, we could come up with these KSAOs as a function of job analysis, which is the process of analyzing and listing the tasks that are associated with the various jobs. By way of a definition, job analysis is the process of analyzing and listing the tasks that are included with the various jobs, all the steps to be taken to perform the different tasks, and all the requirements the respective task put on the job holder. And there are various sources of getting the information for the job analysis. You can look at human resource manuals if the company has a set of manuals guiding the human resource practices. You could look at job descriptions which would have been created by the HR department, or you could even conduct interviews with managers and supervisors of the respective departments, or even the person doing the job. So you conduct an interview with the person doing the job to get the information, or you could even observe how the job is done, or look at an individual analysis. And an individual analysis is basically looking at the KSAOs, the knowledge, skills, and abilities of the individual, looking at the KSAOs of what the job requires, and identifying to what extent a gap exists between what the individual brings to the table and what the job requires in order to be done effectively. So once the job analysis is done, you would have outputs of the job analysis. And the outputs of the job analysis would include job description, which is a document describing the job to be performed in terms of the purpose of the job and the duties and responsibilities. All the tasks which we mentioned we would have identified is contained in the job description. You may also need to create an output of job analysis is a job specification or person specification. And in that aspect of the output of the job analysis, we're looking at the KSAOs required and the terms and conditions. So we talk about the qualifications required to do the job well, the experience required to do the job well, the competencies. We could talk about other attributes in terms of demands the job may place on the job holder, such as physical conditions, unusual hours, travel away from home. And they would also include the terms and conditions, which might talk about the compensation packages, the benefits, leave, and other types of entitlement that the job holder would receive. So those are the outputs of the job analysis process. Now, once we've completed the job analysis and we have the job description and the job specification, we could now go on to look at recruiting. In terms of recruitment, we could talk from the perspective of internal recruitment and external recruitment. Internal recruitment is simply recruiting from within, from other departments that exist within the organization, persons who are already employed within the organization. And of course, external would be persons outside the organization, recruiting new persons to the organization. Now, in some organizations, there are restrictions on internal recruitment. For example, some organizations would give stipulations that a person needs to be employed with the organization for at least 2 years in order to be considered for internal recruitment. Some may give stipulation that a person needs to pass a specific probation period. Some may give restrictions that a person needs to get the approval of their supervisors. So different restrictions could be placed on in terms of who is eligible for internal recruitment. But why would a firm make the decision to go for internal recruitment versus external recruitment? There are several advantages. One, you could talk about the moral of persons within the organization who may be recruited to positions of their choice or may be promoted. The moral of such persons would be high. The organization has an increased capacity to assess the abilities of the candidates because they know these persons. They could get performance appraisal reports on these individuals, so they have that increased capacity to do that kind of analysis. The recruiting cost is usually lower because you are recruiting from persons already within the organization. You don't have to place an ad, you don't have to do interviews. Well, not that many demands in terms of the interviews because persons are already within the organization. And additionally, it could cause a series of promotions to take place. So if a person is promoted from one position, then that position must be filled, which would cause persons to apply for that promotion or position, which would create another vacancy. So it could actually create a succession of promotions. And another benefit is that the organization may only have to hire for entry-level positions. But like with everything else, if there are advantages, there may be disadvantages. And some of the disadvantages in terms of internal recruitment could include inbreeding, which means sameness of ideas or group mind. Everybody's thinking the same way because they've been having the same kinds of conversations all the time, as opposed to, and we would see when we begin talking about external recruitment, new ideas could come from the outside, but because everybody's already on the inside, you have that kind of inbreeding or sameness of ideas. You also have a disadvantage in terms of the persons not promoted may experience moral problems. Persons would not feel good about the fact that they were not promoted or that other persons were promoted in their instead of them. So you may have persons withholding their enthusiasm as a result of that. Also, because the opportunities for promotion may be scarce, you may find there's that kind of infighting or politics playing off within the organization. And a final thing we should consider with internal recruitment is that management may have to create a training plan to address the deficiencies in terms of the way the person functions versus the way the person is now required to function. So internal recruitment, hiring from within, there are advantages and there are disadvantages. In terms of internal recruitment, there are several sources of internal recruitment. You could talk from the perspective of HR management systems or databases that could be created. And it's basically continual updating of employees' profile, the qualifications they obtain. So when they enter the organization, they're going to enter with certain qualifications. Through the passage of time, they are likely to get additional qualifications. So you could be updating their file in terms of the additional qualifications. In terms of training programs they would have completed within the organization, special projects they would have worked on and some of their achievements, discussions in terms of their career plans, where they see themselves going in the future within the organization. And you could also have information related to their performance appraisals, the scores they would have been getting through the period or through the years. All of these could be in the HR management system, and when certain openings occur or arise, you could now match the the requirements of the positions that are available with that which is contained in the employee database. And you could also talk about job posting, and job posting is one of the more common approaches to advertising internal vacancies, for advertising vacancies internally. And this could happen either on a notice board. In the old days, it happened in a notice board. In current times, if the organization is so predisposed, it happens on the intranet, or it could simply happen from communicating with department managers or sending emails to the managers of various departments. Transfers are an additional means of internal recruitment, and it's a straightforward approach that normally, well, it accompanies promotions as well. So you could talk about transfers and promotions in one, and it's a straightforward decision where a person from one department is being considered for a position in another department. And there are likely to be challenges in the sense that a person may function quite efficiently and effectively in one department, and the assumption may be made that because they are functioning quite effectively in that regard, they may function effectively in the other department, which may or may not be the case. And that may not be the case because the technical knowledge required may be different, or it could be that they are not now in the new position. They are required to have people skills or human skills which they have not acquired by virtue of their performance in a previous department. So there may be some challenges to transfers and promotions. Also, we can look at it from the perspective of succession planning, and succession planning is basically key positions within the organization identified, and individuals showing that proclivity, or showing that those tendencies that would be useful in these key positions, they are prepared, they are identified, and they are prepared for these positions for when persons who are currently functioning in the position, for when they are either resigning, retiring from the organization, or if for some reason they, well, going the grade beyond. So succession planning is about identifying those persons who are best disposed to take over key positions. In terms of internal recruitment, it has also been discussed as re-recruiting previous employees or applicants as a form of internal recruitment. And I think, notwithstanding these persons may be coming from outside of the organization, they are considered internally recruited because there's no requirement of doing an advertisement. So in terms of external recruitment, you would talk about doing an advertisement, inviting persons to apply, then sorting out these applications, shortlisting individuals, conducting interviews. But if you're re-recruiting previous employees, you don't have those activities to engage in. If you're re-recruiting previous applicants, you don't have those activities to engage in. So in this context, it's considered a form of internal recruitment. From the perspective of planning, it's considered internal recruitment, notwithstanding the persons are not already within the organization. And similarly, recruiting referrals from existing employees. So because the process is basically not as elaborate as going outside, this too is considered a form of internal recruitment. So we're saying that you could have a need for the HR planning process could provide a need for persons to come in the organization, and of course we're going to have to do recruitment. Recruitment could be done internally, or recruitment could be done externally. In terms of external recruitment, there are several advantages, and we talked about some of the disadvantages of internal recruitment a while ago. So the advantages of external recruitment are likely to be the exact opposite. One, talk about new blood bringing new perspectives. In the previous internal recruitment, we talked about inbreeding or sameness of ideas. So an advantage of external recruitment is new blood, new fresh ideas. Training new hires is cheaper and faster because of prior external experience in some cases. So because you're going to be looking for persons with specific KSAOs, knowledge, skills, abilities, and other attributes, the training required may be minimal because you're going to be getting persons with those kinds of qualification and competencies. So the training may be minimal, may be specific to induction training, as the case may be. Now, we also talked about with internal recruitment that there's likely to be politics or infighting. With external recruitment, you don't have that as an issue. The new persons that we're going to hire, they don't have any group of political support within the organization, so there's not going to be any real politics associated with that. And of course, the new person coming in would bring industry insights or practices that they would have been engaging in at another organization or something to that effect. Now, because we have advantages, we expect that there may be disadvantages as well. And one of the disadvantages may be that the firm may not necessarily select someone who fit the organization. So you may have persons, might be a good person job fit, but may not necessarily be a person organization fit. For example, if let's say I am involved in human resource development, so I'm involved in organizational development, human resource development, and I'm exceptionally qualified and I'm exceptionally skilled at what I'm doing. But if I'm asked to do that within a setting like, let's say, the prison service, maybe the prison service is not the ideal place that I want to be. So I'm not a good organization fit, notwithstanding I'm a good fit for the job. I have the KSAOs to do the job effectively, but because of the organization, I may have some issues. And those are some of the challenges that you could encounter with external recruiting. Additionally, the process may cause problems for internal candidates not selected unless it's entry-level positions. So you bring persons into the organization from the outside and it's not entry-level positions. These persons within the organization are likely to feel they should have been given the opportunity. And additionally, the new persons that we're bringing in, they may require increased time in terms of induction training, or they may require increased adjustment period or orientation. So let's look at sources of external recruitment, and there are several. External recruitment could take place in terms of college or university recruiting. So some organizations would actually go to universities and have a career day, explain what their organization does, the various jobs that are available, the careers that are available, what persons would be doing on a daily basis, the compensation, etc. They would go to universities and use that as a source of recruiting. There's labor unions may also be a source of external recruitment, because we have persons who might have been laid off, or persons who would be in a database by the union, or persons who may have just registered in terms of using the union as an employment agency type arrangement, and the union may be able to provide those persons. They have trade associations such as professional societies or websites, etc., as a means of filling vacancies. You have employment agencies where you could just go give your information, the type of job you're looking for, the type of salary you're looking for, the type of experiences that you have, and when they have a match, they would contact you. You have organizations that would use newspaper ads, magazine ads, television ads, or internet-based ads. You have job fairs that, as I mentioned, various organizations can host a fair talking about the jobs that exist. You have e-recruiting, for example, Caribbean Jobs, and you have things like gate recruiting. And gate recruiting is like a contingent type of approach where persons show up at the gates at a particular time, and they are considered for jobs to the extent that the demand exists when they show up. Let me give you an example to try to clear that up a bit. So you have, let's say, a company like a factory that there are trucks that leave the factory on a daily basis, and you would have the drivers, just identifying persons at the gates. If you need two persons to load and take stuff off of the truck and load it in various groceries or shops, as the case may be, you could recruit those persons right there at the gate, and you complete a return, and these persons would get paid accordingly. Good. So we've talked about the internal sources of recruitment. We've talked about external sources of recruitment. Let's just go quickly and talk about the process of external recruitment. So we're going to talk about the recruitment and selection process, and we're going to look at maybe about 6 steps or so in the process. The first thing we're talking about is attracting candidates, identifying, evaluating, and using the most appropriate sources or means of getting applicants. The most appropriate sources or means. So in some cases, that might mean using the name of the company as a brand. Why would you use the name of the company as a brand? You would probably use the name of the company if you want persons to be aware of the company, and the company itself would allow the best set of talent to be attracted to the organization. But there are some instances where you would prefer not to use the name of the company because you don't want to attract too many candidates that would just make the process a little more difficult than it should be. But you have to, that's the first step in the process of recruiting, attracting the right candidates. And in making the decisions that are necessary for that process, it's important to know the strengths and weaknesses of the organization, including the reputation, the pay, the benefits, the working conditions, the attractiveness of the job, the location, the security of employment, the career prospects. All these things are things you need to know and make a determination of what role they're going to play in attracting the ideal candidates. Once you place your ads, or you posted the jobs and you've got persons applying to the jobs, then you're going to have to treat with sorting out all the applications. Sorting out applications, that's the second step. So a process that is used, all applicants are listed on a standard control sheet, and each component of the application criteria is awarded a point. For example, if we talk about the knowledge, skills, abilities, and other attributes, they're identified and each may be awarded a point. You could talk about functional competencies, those things that would make you, the technical aspects that would make you be able to function effectively, or behavioral competencies, the behaviors in which you need to engage in order to be effective in the position, and there would be a score. Now, applicants are ranked according to the points scored. Applicants with sufficient points for an interview are shortlisted. So when you look at the number of persons applying and you look at the KSAOs that are required, and you award a score for each KSAO, and you determine persons who have at least 8 points would be shortlisted. Persons with less than 8 points would not be considered, or would be considered unsuitable. So you rank persons according to points, and the applicants with sufficient points you shortlist. Then you have to prepare the interview program. We'll talk about the interview program in a bit. And the shortlisted applicants, you will now contact them in a standard way, either through a letter, through an email, or in some cases now persons are being contacted via WhatsApp text messages. But you contact the shortlisted individuals and give them the relevant information in relation to the interview. In terms of successful applicants, they could now progress to the next stage, or in some cases they may be offered a job once you're successful after the interview, which we'll talk about in a bit. And unsuccessful applicants should also be informed. Now, keep in mind, I'm talking about persons who would have attended the interviews or completed the aptitude tests, the various aptitude tests that we may do. These individuals should be informed of what would have transpired. Some organizations would indicate clearly in their advertisement that unsuitable applications would not be acknowledged. That is a different thing. If the requirements are included in the ad and you do not have the requirements but you still submit an application, you may not be contacted. And that is a different thing from talking about persons who would have completed the interview process or the aptitude testing and they were not successful. They should be contacted and should be informed. So once you've sorted out your applications, you've shortlisted the individuals, you can now call individuals for an interview. And there are different types of interviews that you could make a determination that you're going to go with. Face-to-face discussion, it provides the best opportunity for the establishment of close contact between the interviewer and the candidate. So if you need that kind of one-on-one conversation, a face-to-face discussion or face-to-face interview may be optimal. And then you have interview panels, which 2 or more people gather in one room to interview the candidate. It may be a human resource personnel or someone from the human resource team, as well as a line manager, or it may be various line managers, or you have the option of selection boards, which are more formal, usually larger interviewing panels convened by an official body, because there are a number of parties interested in the selection decision. So a number of parties are interested in what would go on with this particular decision that is to be made. So all persons would bring what they have to bring to bear on the interview process. So in some cases, you would deal specifically with the interview and make determinations in terms of what would happen with that individual, whether they would be considered for the job or whether they would not be. In some other cases, there are different tests that might be done. And some of these tests include an aptitude test may be done, where you evaluate the talent, the ability, or the potential to perform certain tasks by the individual, or intelligence tests, which are psychological tests designed to measure a variety of mental functions such as reasoning, comprehension, judgment, or personality tests, which are designed to determine the personality construct or the emotional status, the interests, and the values of the candidate. Or you have psychometric testing, which is a scientific method to measure the individual's mental capabilities, the behavioral style, and the suitability for the role. Many organizations within the protective services, for example, the prison service, the police service, and the fire service as well, they would always use psychometric tests to determine a person's suitability for different roles within their organizations. So once we have done these things, we've completed the interview and we think we've gotten the person that we're interested in, or we've done the other types of selection approaches or testing, and we've identified the person that we are satisfied with, we would have to look at conducting references checks and background checks. And references checks are useful for the purpose of confirming factual information obtained either from the application form or shared at an interview. And background checks, they are often requested by employers to determine to what extent this person's behavior in other settings, for example, how a person behaves in their community, how a person is regarded in their community, if a person has been in conflict with the law, or if a person's social media presence is inimical to what the organization is attempting to achieve. So all of these things would take place within the background checks. And once everything checks out, a person may be offered the job, and once they begin the job, they may have to go through a process of induction training. So they would come into the organization, complete the relevant application form. Some of the things that you would include in your application form might be personal information, demographic information, age, physical data, maybe height, physical disability, etc. You talk about education, you talk about experiences, you would talk about, in some cases, they have hobbies and interests. You'd have references on the form as well, and some forms at the bottom have any other information that you would like to provide. So different, dependent on the organization, the application form may be configured in one way versus another. And then you would have the induction training, and the induction training is, the point is being made to obtain effective output as early as possible from the new hire. A process of induction training is necessary. It smoothens the preliminary stage for a better startup and establish a favorable attitude towards the organization by the individual, and also provides whatever transitioning support that individual may be needing. Once that, well, of course, not once, but during the induction phase, or simultaneous with the induction phase, or simultaneous with the process of completing the application form, there are some final activities that you would want to carry out, and these final activities might include conducting medical checks if you want to do that, completing the appointment letter, collection of personal details from the individual, entering the person into the human resource management system, dealing with payroll related activities, a person either getting letters to take to their banks or bringing in their bank account numbers, etc. These are some activities that would go into the final setup processes. So basically we're gonna wrap here in terms of this video, but what we wanted to talk about is the process of recruitment and selection. And we're saying that once the HR process has been the HR planning process has been completed, you're going to have prescriptive strategies. As a result of these prescriptive strategies, we're now going to do some recruitment and selection. They could be based on the prescriptive strategies, or they could be based on exceptions to the rules, or they could be based on emergent strategies, which we would have talked about. In terms of recruitment, they are a function of the KSAOs required by the various jobs. In terms of the various jobs, we talk about doing a job analysis to identify the KSAOs required for the various jobs, and after our job analysis, we could come up with job descriptions and person specification or job specification. Then we go into the process of recruiting, which could be internal or external. We talk about the advantages and disadvantages of both cases, internal versus external, and we looked at a process of completing external recruitment. So basically those are some of the things we wanted to talk about in this video. Of course, we are operating from the perspective where an organization that we are privileged to support, we are assisting them in terms of the good practices or a structure that would allow them to improve human resource management at their organization. So that brings us to the end of this video. In the next video, we are likely to be talking about, okay, so we bring persons into the organization. What do we need to do next? We need to provide training. So we'll be talking about training and development in video 5. See you in the next video.